Shady Sands does not begin as a capital, a symbol, or a promise. It begins as a quiet attempt to survive. In the early days of the post-war world, Shady Sands is little more than a fragile settlement carved out of an unforgiving desert, defined less by ambition and more by caution. It exists because a small group of people believed that stability, even in its most modest form, was worth protecting. There is nothing dramatic about its origin. That simplicity is what makes it important. The land around Shady Sands is dry, open, and exposed. The desert does not offer natural cover or abundance. Water is scarce, soil is unreliable, and the horizon stretches endlessly in every direction. This environment shapes the settlement's personality long before it shapes its politics. Life here is slow and deliberate, guided by routine rather than impulse. Every structure, every wall, every planted crop exists for a reason rooted in necessity. Early Shady Sands is defined by restraint. The settlers do not build outward quickly. They build inward, reinforcing what little they have. Walls rise not as symbols of dominance, but as barriers against fear. They are practical, unadorned, and built to last rather than impress. These walls reflect a mindset focused on preservation, not expansion. Safety comes before growth. Familiarity comes before change. The people of Shady Sands value predictability above almost everything else. In a world reshaped by chaos and radiation, predictability becomes a form of comfort. Days follow similar patterns. Tasks repeat. Farming, maintenance, and watchfulness form the backbone of daily life. There is no illusion of control over the world beyond the walls, but within them, order is carefully maintained. This emphasis on order is not enforced through harsh authority in the beginning. It emerges organically from shared need. Everyone understands that survival depends on cooperation and consistency. Deviating from routine introduces risk. Risk invites loss. Over time, this shared understanding hardens into culture. Shady Sands becomes a place where rules are respected, not because they are imposed, but because they work. Isolation plays a critical role in shaping this culture. Shady Sands is not positioned along major trade routes in its earliest days. Travelers pass nearby, but not through it. This separation limits outside influence, allowing the settlement to develop its own rhythms without constant disruption. News arrives slowly. Change arrives even more slowly. This insulation gives Shady Sands time to stabilize, while other settlements fracture or collapse. The lack of constant threat also shapes how residents perceive danger. Raiders, mutants, and hostile factions exist, but they are not ever present within the settlement's walls. This allows fear to remain abstract rather than immediate. Instead of reacting to danger constantly, Shady Sands prepares for it methodically. Watch rotations are maintained, supplies are rationed. Contingencies are planned quietly and revised as needed. One of the most defining aspects of early Shady Sands is its relationship with agriculture. Farming is not just a means of survival, it is a statement of intent. To plant crops is to believe in tomorrow. It requires patience, planning, and trust in cycles that extend beyond immediate needs. In a world where many survive by scavenging the remnants of the past, Shady Sands invests in the future. This agricultural focus slows life down. Growth happens over seasons, not days. Success is measured in harvests, not victories. This rhythm reinforces calm and repetition, qualities that become deeply embedded in the settlement's identity. Even moments of crisis are approached with the same measured mindset, evaluated against long-term stability rather than short-term gain. Leadership in Shady Sands reflects this gradualism. Early leaders are not conquerors or visionaries chasing grandeur. They are organizers, planners, and caretakers. Their authority comes from trust rather than fear. Decisions are practical, sometimes conservative, always cautious. Change is introduced carefully, often only after extended discussion and observation. This cautious leadership style prevents rapid transformation, but it also prevents collapse. Shady Sands does not gamble with its future. It builds it piece by piece, reinforcing foundations before adding new layers. Over time, this approach creates resilience. When challenges arise, the settlement does not panic, it adjusts. The physical layout of Shady Sands mirrors its philosophy. Buildings are functional and spaced with intention. There is little waste. Paths are worn by repeated use, not designed for display. Everything feels placed rather than imposed. This practicality extends to how people move through the space. There is no urgency in daily movement. People walk with purpose, not haste. Sound within Shady Sands is subdued. Wind across the desert, the creak of structures, the muted conversations of residents going about familiar tasks. There is no constant noise of industry or conflict. This quiet reinforces a sense of normalcy, rare in the post-war world. Silence here does not signal emptiness. It signals stability. Shady Sands' early relationship with outsiders is cautious but not hostile. Visitors are observed before being welcomed. Trust is earned slowly. This guarded openness prevents exploitation while allowing selective exchange of knowledge and goods. Over time, this balance strengthens the settlement's position without compromising its values. The settlement's moral framework also emerges gradually. Justice is practical, focused on maintaining order rather than punishment. Conflict resolution prioritizes restoration over retribution. This approach reduces internal tension and reinforces community bonds. People know what is expected of them, and consequences are consistent rather than arbitrary. As years pass, Shady Sands begins to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. Children grow up knowing only its routines. For them, the wasteland beyond the walls is distant and abstract. Normal life exists here, contained and protected. This generational continuity deepens the settlement's sense of permanence. This sense of permanence is subtle. There are no monuments or grand declarations of survival. Permanence is expressed through maintenance, repetition, and care. Walls are repaired, fields are tended. Systems are refined rather than replaced. The future is approached with patience rather than urgency. Shady Sands does not seek to dominate the wasteland, it seeks to endure within it. This distinction shapes every choice the settlement makes. Power is viewed as responsibility, not opportunity. Expansion is considered carefully, weighed against the risk of destabilizing what already works. In this early phase, Shady Sands represents something rare in the Fallout world. Not hope in a dramatic sense, but steadiness, a place where life continues quietly, without spectacle. It does not promise greatness, it promises continuity. That promise becomes its foundation. Long before it becomes politically significant, before it influences the fate of entire regions, Shady Sands proves that order can exist without tyranny, that growth can happen without haste, and that civilization can return not with a roar, but with a careful, patient step. A small settlement in the desert, surrounded by emptiness, choosing routine over chaos and patience over fear. Shady Sands begins not as a symbol of the future, but as a quiet refusal to let the past dictate what comes next. Shady Sands does not grow quickly, and that slowness becomes one of its defining strengths. While other settlements in the wasteland expand impulsively or collapse under pressure, Shady Sands moves forward at a deliberate pace, guided by careful observation rather than urgency. Growth here is not driven by conquest or opportunity, but by capacity. The settlement expands only when it can sustain what it already has. This restraint shapes how Shady Sands understands progress. Progress is not measured by size, wealth, or influence, but by reliability. Can the crops be maintained year after year? Can the walls be repaired without outside dependence? Can disputes be resolved without splintering the community? These questions matter more than ambition. Stability is treated as an achievement in itself. As the population slowly increases, Shady Sands begins to formalize routines that were once informal. What started as shared responsibility gradually becomes structured roles. Guards, farmers, planners, and caretakers emerge not through decree, but necessity. These roles are respected because they serve the collective rather than elevate individuals. Authority remains understated, tied to function rather than status. This functional approach to leadership prevents the rise of dramatic power struggles in Shady Sands' early years. Leaders are seen working alongside others, participating in the same routines they help organize. This visibility builds trust. Decisions feel grounded rather than imposed. When mistakes are made, they are corrected quietly, without spectacle or blame. The settlement's growing organization also influences how it interacts with uncertainty. Instead of reacting emotionally to rumors or distant threats, Shady Sands develops habits of verification. Information is weighed, discussed, and contextualized before action is taken. This process slows response time, but it also reduces unnecessary risk. The settlement learns when to wait as much as when to act. Waiting becomes a skill cultivated over time. The desert teaches patience naturally. Storms pass, heat fades, threats move on. Shady Sands internalizes this rhythm, allowing time to resolve many problems without direct intervention. The settlement watches carefully, ready to respond if needed, but not eager to escalate. As Shady Sands becomes more established, it begins to attract attention. Travelers notice its order. Traders recognize its reliability. Word spreads slowly, carried by people who value consistency over novelty. This reputation draws interest without overwhelming the settlement. Shady Sands remains selective, cautious about who it welcomes and what it adopts. Trade, when it develops, is handled conservatively. Exchanges are practical rather than speculative. The settlement avoids dependence on any single external partner. This diversification protects it from sudden shortages or manipulation. Shady Sands understands that reliance creates vulnerability, and it structures its economy to minimize that risk. The introduction of trade also introduces new ideas. Tools improve, knowledge spreads. Shady Sands absorbs these influences carefully, adapting them to fit existing routines rather than reshaping itself entirely. Innovation is welcomed only when it enhances stability. Anything that threatens to disrupt balance is delayed or rejected outright. This selective adaptation reinforces the settlement's identity. Shady Sands does not define itself by what it adopts, but by what it refuses. Excess, extravagance, and unnecessary complexity are avoided. Simplicity remains a guiding principle. This simplicity is not born of ignorance, but of choice. The physical environment of Shady Sands continues to reflect this philosophy. As new structures are added, they follow the same restrained design language as earlier buildings, function over form. Durability over display. The settlement grows denser rather than sprawling outward. This density strengthens communal ties and simplifies defense. Daily life within Shady Sands becomes increasingly predictable. This predictability creates a sense of safety that extends beyond physical protection. Emotional stability grows as well. People know what to expect from one another. Conflicts are fewer and easier to resolve because shared values are well established. Children raised in Shady Sands inherit this worldview naturally. They learn routines before they learn fear. The wasteland is something they understand intellectually rather than emotionally. This distinction matters. It allows a new generation to approach the world with caution rather than trauma. Normalcy, even a limited version of it, becomes the default. Education in Shady Sands develops informally at first, through observation and participation. Skills are passed down through practice rather than instruction. Over time, this creates a population that values competence and responsibility. Knowledge is practical, rooted in experience. Abstract ideas are secondary to what works. This practical education shapes how residents think about the future. Long-term planning becomes normalized. Decisions are made with the next season, the next year, and the next generation in mind. Short-term gain is consistently sacrificed for long-term stability. This mindset sets Shady Sands apart from many other settlements that struggle to look beyond immediate survival. The settlement's relationship with law evolves alongside its growth. Early rules, based on consensus, gradually become codified practices. These laws remain simple and focused. Their purpose is not control, but coordination. By clarifying expectations, Shady Sands reduces friction and misunderstanding. Justice remains restorative rather than punitive. The goal is always to preserve cohesion. Punishments, when necessary, are proportional and transparent. This consistency builds trust in the system itself. People follow the rules not because they fear punishment, but because the rules make sense. As Shady Sands' influence expands subtly, it begins to affect the surrounding region. Nearby settlements notice its methods and occasionally adopt similar practices. This influence spreads quietly, without enforcement. Shady Sands does not export ideology. It demonstrates viability. Others observe and decide for themselves. This quiet influence marks the beginning of Shady Sands' broader significance within the world of Fallout. It becomes proof that civilization can re-emerge without replicating the worst excesses of the past, not through domination or nostalgia, but through restraint and adaptation. Yet Shady Sands remains cautious even as its reputation grows. It does not rush to formalize alliances or assert leadership over others. It understands that visibility invites challenge. Influence is maintained through example rather than declaration. This approach preserves autonomy while extending reach. Internally, this period of growth reinforces confidence. The settlement has survived long enough to trust its own methods. This confidence is quiet, expressed through continued adherence to routine rather than celebration. Shady Sands does not commemorate its survival, it simply continues. The desert remains ever present, shaping perspective. No matter how stable the settlement becomes, the environment reminds its residents of fragility. Droughts threaten, resources fluctuate. This constant reminder prevents complacency. Shady Sands remains alert, grounded by the knowledge that stability must be maintained actively. This balance between confidence and caution defines Shady Sands at this stage. It is no longer merely surviving, but it is not yet aspiring to greatness. It exists in a steady middle space where life feels sustainable rather than precarious. Over time, this steadiness becomes its greatest asset. While the wasteland remains unpredictable, Shady Sands provides a counterpoint, a place where systems hold, routines persist, and people live without constant fear. This contrast strengthens its appeal without requiring change. Shady Sands does not promise safety without effort. It demands participation, responsibility, and patience. In return, it offers continuity, a life defined not by crisis, but by repetition and care. In this phase, Shady Sands solidifies its identity. It is no longer just a settlement, it is a method, a way of approaching the world that prioritizes balance over ambition and endurance over speed. This identity prepares it for the challenges that will eventually come. Challenges that will test whether quiet stability can withstand the pressures of power. For now, though, Shady Sands remains calm. The walls stand, the fields grow, the routines continue. The desert watches, unchanged, as a small pocket of order persists within it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, shaping the future one careful decision at a time. As Shady Sands matures, its sense of responsibility begins to extend beyond its own walls. This shift does not happen through conquest or declaration. It happens quietly, through accumulation. More travelers pass through, more traders linger, more neighboring settlements begin to look toward Shady Sands not as a curiosity, but as a reference point. Stability, once internal, starts to radiate outward. This outward influence is subtle at first. Shady Sands does not issue demands or offer protection openly. Instead, it becomes a place where disputes can be discussed without immediate violence, where trade feels reliable, and where agreements tend to hold. In the wasteland, reliability is rare. When it appears, it attracts attention naturally. Shady Sands becomes known less for what it has and more for how it behaves. This reputation creates a quiet pressure. With recognition comes expectation. Outsiders begin to assume that Shady Sands will act responsibly, mediate fairly, and respond predictably. These assumptions are not spoken aloud, but they shape interactions. Shady Sands finds itself becoming a standard against which other settlements measure themselves, whether intentionally or not. Internally, this shift prompts careful reflection. Leaders and planners recognize that influence carries risk. The more visible Shady Sands becomes, the more likely it is to attract scrutiny, envy, or hostility. Growth is no longer just about internal capacity, it is about managing perception. Shady Sands begins to think not only about what it does, but how its actions will be interpreted beyond its borders. This awareness leads to the gradual formalization of governance. What was once consensus-based decision-making evolves into clearer structures. Councils form, roles become more defined, responsibilities are documented rather than assumed. This transition is handled cautiously, with an emphasis on continuity rather than change. The goal is not to transform Shady Sands, but to preserve its character as it grows. Laws become more explicit during this period, not more numerous, but more clearly articulated. The settlement understands that clarity prevents misunderstanding, especially as population increases. These laws remain grounded in practicality. They are written to coordinate behavior, not to express ideology. Their language is direct, their enforcement consistent. This consistency reinforces trust. Residents know what is expected of them and what they can expect in return. Outsiders observe this order and adjust their behavior accordingly. Shady Sands becomes a place where unpredictability diminishes, replaced by routine interactions that follow familiar patterns. The emergence of formal governance also changes how Shady Sands perceives power. Power is no longer abstract. It is recognized as something that must be managed carefully. Leaders are aware that authority, once centralized, can drift toward coercion if left unchecked. As a result, decision-making remains distributed. No single individual becomes indispensable. This distribution of authority slows action, but it also prevents sudden shifts. Change in Shady Sands continues to be incremental. Policies are tested quietly before being adopted widely. Mistakes are corrected without spectacle. The settlement prioritizes stability over efficiency, believing that durability matters more than speed. As Shady Sands' influence expands, it begins to encounter the remnants of old world systems more frequently. Ruins, technologies, and records from before the war present both opportunity and danger. The settlement approaches these remnants cautiously. Technology is evaluated not for its power, but for its compatibility with existing routines. This cautious approach distinguishes Shady Sands from factions that seek to reclaim the past wholesale. Instead of restoring old systems, Shady Sands adapts selectively. It extracts what can be integrated safely and ignores what would disrupt balance. This restraint prevents dependency on fragile or poorly understood technologies. The presence of old-world artifacts also influences cultural memory. Shady Sands does not glorify the past. It treats it as context rather than aspiration. The pre-war world is acknowledged as something that existed, failed, and should be understood, but not recreated. This perspective grounds the settlement firmly in the present. As more people settle in Shady Sands or align themselves with it, diversity increases. Backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences converge within the walls. This diversity introduces new tensions, but the settlement's strong routines absorb them gradually. Differences are managed through shared structure rather than forced conformity. The emphasis on routine becomes even more important during this phase. Routine provides common ground when values differ. It creates predictability in daily life, reducing friction. People may disagree privately, but publicly they participate in the same systems. This shared participation reinforces unity without requiring uniformity. Trade networks continue to expand cautiously. Shady Sands becomes a hub, not because it seeks to be one, but because its reliability attracts exchange. Goods flow through the settlement steadily. This flow increases wealth, but Shady Sands remains careful not to equate wealth with success. Resources are reinvested into infrastructure, maintenance, and resilience rather than luxury. Infrastructure improvements are subtle but significant. Storage becomes more efficient. Water systems are refined. Defensive measures are maintained rather than expanded aggressively. These improvements reinforce long-term stability without changing the settlement's character. Shady Sands still looks modest. Its strength remains understated. As the settlement's role in the region grows, it begins to attract individuals interested in organization and governance. These individuals bring ideas shaped by broader experience. Shady Sands listens, evaluates, and adopts selectively. External ideas are filtered through existing values before implementation. This filtering process preserves continuity. Shady Sands evolves without losing its core identity. The settlement remains grounded in caution, patience, and cooperation. Its expansion feels organic rather than imposed, a natural extension of its initial principles. Over time, Shady Sands starts to be discussed in terms of future potential. Some see it as a model. Others see it as a seed for something larger. Internally, these discussions are met with restraint. The settlement does not reject the idea of growth, but it resists projection. The future is approached carefully, with an emphasis on preparation rather than ambition. This restraint delays transformation, but it also ensures readiness. When opportunities arise, Shady Sands is positioned to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. Its systems are flexible enough to adapt without breaking. This adaptability becomes one of its most valuable traits. The desert surrounding Shady Sands remains unchanged, serving as a constant reminder of limits. No matter how organized the settlement becomes, the environment resists domination. This resistance reinforces humility. Shady Sands never forgets that it exists by cooperation with its surroundings, not mastery over them. This humility shapes the settlement's worldview. Power is treated as temporary. Stability is treated as ongoing work. Nothing is assumed to last without effort. This mindset prevents stagnation and complacency, even as success accumulates. As Shady Sands enters this new phase, it occupies an unusual position in the world of Fallout. It is no longer just a settlement, but it is not yet an empire. It exists between these identities, balancing local responsibility with regional influence. This in-between state is uncomfortable at times. Expectations increase, decisions carry wider consequences. Yet Shady Sands continues to approach each challenge with the same methodical calm that defined its beginnings. It does not rush to redefine itself. It allows its role to emerge gradually. For residents, daily life remains largely unchanged. Fields are tended, walls are repaired, councils meet quietly. The extraordinary developments occurring around them are absorbed into routine. This normalization prevents fear and preserves a sense of continuity. Children grow up unaware of the settlement's growing significance. For them, Shady Sands is simply home. This generational continuity reinforces the settlement's grounding. Its future is shaped not by grand visionaries, but by people who have known nothing else. This is perhaps Shady Sands' greatest strength. It does not feel like a project or experiment. It feels lived in. Its systems exist to support life rather than define it. This grounding makes it resilient in ways that more ambitious factions struggle to replicate. As time passes, Shady Sands stands quietly at the edge of transformation. It has not yet crossed into something larger, but the foundations are laid. Order exists, trust exists, influence exists. What remains uncertain is how these elements will interact when tested by greater pressures. For now, Shady Sands continues as it always has, calm, deliberate, and steady, a settlement shaped by patience rather than urgency, existing not to prove a point, but to endure. The desert stretches endlessly beyond its walls, unchanged, while within them, a small but persistent form of civilization continues to refine itself, one careful decision at a time. As Shady Sands continues to settle into its expanding role, the idea of permanence begins to take on a new weight. In its earliest days, survival was the priority, and the future was measured in seasons. Now, with systems in place and routines holding firm, time stretches further ahead. Decisions are no longer made only for tomorrow, but for years that many of the original settlers may never see. This shift quietly changes how the settlement thinks about itself. With longevity comes the need for record keeping. Shady Sands begins to document its decisions, agreements, and boundaries more carefully. These records are not kept to glorify achievements or preserve individual names. They exist to prevent confusion. Memory alone is unreliable, especially as generations change. Writing things down becomes another way to stabilize order, ensuring continuity even as people come and go. This growing reliance on documentation subtly alters authority. Power is no longer held solely by those present in the moment. It is embedded in precedent. Past decisions inform future ones, creating a sense of institutional memory. This memory does not dictate outcomes, but it frames discussion. The past becomes a reference point rather than a burden. At the same time, Shady Sands remains cautious about allowing rules to harden into dogma. Leaders understand that rigid systems can become brittle. Laws and procedures are reviewed periodically, adjusted quietly when they no longer serve their purpose. This balance between structure and flexibility prevents stagnation while maintaining order. The settlement's relationship with security evolves during this period as well. Early defenses focused on immediate threats. Now, attention turns toward deterrence and visibility. Shady Sands does not seek to intimidate, but it understands that predictability in defense can discourage opportunistic aggression. Guards are trained to be observant rather than aggressive, reinforcing the settlement's preference for restraint. This approach to security affects how residents feel within the walls. There is a growing sense of ease, but not complacency. People are aware of the systems protecting them, yet those systems remain unobtrusive. Safety becomes part of the background rather than a constant concern. This allows daily life to proceed without tension. Daily life itself becomes more layered. Specialized roles free individuals to focus on specific tasks, increasing efficiency and competence. Crafts improve, repairs last longer, food distribution becomes more reliable. These improvements are incremental, often unnoticed day to day, but over time they transform quality of life. With improved stability comes leisure, though it is modest and understated. Leisure in Shady Sands does not take the form of grand entertainment or excess. It appears as conversation, rest, and repetition. People gather quietly. Stories are shared sparingly. There is satisfaction in routine done well. These small comforts reinforce attachment to place. This attachment deepens community bonds. People begin to identify not just as survivors, but as residents. Shady Sands becomes more than a shelter. It becomes a shared identity. This identity is not enforced through symbolism or ceremony. It emerges organically through participation in daily life. As identity strengthens, so does the sense of obligation. Residents feel responsible not only for themselves, but for the settlement as a whole. This responsibility is rarely spoken aloud. It manifests in care taken during ordinary tasks. Maintenance is performed diligently. Resources are conserved. Small acts accumulate into collective resilience. The settlement's expanding influence also brings ethical questions into sharper focus. As Shady Sands becomes more central to regional stability, its decisions carry greater consequences. Leaders are aware that even neutrality can have impact. Choosing not to act may affect others as much as intervention would. This awareness introduces a new layer of complexity. Shady Sands responds to this complexity with the same caution that has defined it from the beginning. Decisions involving outsiders are deliberated carefully. The settlement avoids entanglement unless involvement aligns clearly with its values of stability and order. It does not rush to become an arbiter of the wasteland. It waits for clarity. This waiting sometimes frustrates others. Some see Shady Sands as overly cautious, even hesitant. Internally, this restraint is understood as discipline. Acting too quickly risks undermining everything that has been built. The settlement prefers to move slowly rather than correct major mistakes later. Over time, this reputation for caution becomes part of Shady Sands' identity. Allies trust it to be consistent. Opponents find it difficult to provoke. the settlement's predictability becomes a form of strength. People know what Shady Sands will and will not do, and that knowledge reduces uncertainty. The environment continues to reinforce this mindset. The desert does not reward haste. Effort must be sustained, not rushed. Shady Sands internalizes this lesson deeply. Projects unfold over long periods. Construction is steady. Improvements are tested before being relied upon. Nothing is assumed permanent without maintenance. This long-term perspective shapes how residents think about inheritance and succession. Leadership transitions are planned rather than reactive. Roles are taught gradually, ensuring continuity. Knowledge is passed down through practice as much as instruction. This preparation reduces disruption when change inevitably occurs. As generations pass, Shady Sands begins to feel rooted in time. Children grow up knowing elders who remember its earliest days. Stories circulate quietly, not as legends, but as context. These stories reinforce the settlement's values without elevating individuals above the collective. The absence of hero worship is deliberate. Shady Sands does not want its stability to depend on exceptional figures. It wants systems that function regardless of who occupies them. This emphasis on structure over personality ensures resilience. When individuals leave or pass on, the settlement adapts without crisis. The growing sense of permanence also brings subtle shifts in how residents relate to the outside world. The wasteland feels less threatening, but also less relevant. Shady Sands becomes a point of reference, a place to return to. Travel is undertaken with intention rather than necessity. Home becomes a concept as much as a location. This rootedness creates emotional grounding. Even during uncertainty, residents feel anchored. The walls represent not just protection, but continuity. Life inside them follows familiar rhythms. This familiarity reduces stress and supports long-term cooperation. As Shady Sands continues to mature, it remains careful not to overextend. Every expansion is weighed against capacity. Every new responsibility is evaluated for sustainability. This discipline prevents sudden collapse and preserves trust. The settlement's quiet success does not go unnoticed. Others observe and draw conclusions. Some attempt to replicate its methods. Others resent its stability. Shady Sands remains largely indifferent to both responses. It focuses inward, maintaining what works. This inward focus does not mean isolation. Trade, communication, and limited cooperation continue. Shady Sands simply refuses to define itself through external validation. Its worth is measured internally by the consistency of its routines and the well-being of its residents. As time moves forward, Shady Sands occupies a stable plateau. It is neither struggling nor transforming dramatically. This plateau is intentional. Growth has slowed, but depth has increased. Systems are refined, culture solidifies, identity stabilizes. This stage of development is quiet, almost unremarkable on the surface, yet it is crucial. It lays the groundwork for everything that will follow. Without this period of consolidation, later expansion would be fragile. Shady Sands understands this intuitively. The settlement continues to wake each day to the same desert horizon. Wind moves across the sand. The sun rises and sets. Inside the walls, people go about familiar tasks. Change happens, but slowly, layered beneath routine. In this calm persistence, Shady Sands demonstrates a rare form of strength, not the strength to conquer, but the strength to remain, to hold shape over time, to adapt without losing identity. It is here, in this steady middle phase, that Shady Sands becomes more than a settlement. It becomes a foundation, quiet, patient, and durable, prepared to bear the weight of future transformation without breaking under it. As Shady Sands settles into its role as a regional anchor, the idea of coordination begins to matter more than expansion. The settlement does not seek to absorb others or impose authority. Instead, it learns how to align with nearby communities without dissolving their independence. This alignment is quiet and procedural, built on shared expectations rather than formal control. Agreements become more common during this period, not treaties in the grand sense, but understandings. These agreements are intentionally narrow, focused on practical outcomes rather than long-term promises. Shady Sands prefers clarity over ambition, knowing that overcommitment introduces fragility. This preference for limited commitment shapes how the settlement approaches cooperation. It avoids becoming indispensable. Assistance is offered, but rarely in ways that create dependency. Knowledge is shared, but not centralized. Shady Sands understands that a network of stable settlements is stronger than a single dominant one. Stability spreads best when it is distributed. This distributed approach to influence reduces tension. Neighboring communities feel supported rather than threatened. They retain autonomy while benefiting from predictable interaction. Shady Sands gains partners without assuming the burden of governance. This balance preserves peace without requiring enforcement. Internally, this outward coordination prompts reflection on values. Leaders and planners revisit the settlement's core principles to ensure that expansion of influence does not erode identity. Meetings become more deliberate. Decisions are weighed against long-term coherence. Shady Sands remains careful not to become reactive to external pressures. The settlement systems adapt to this broader engagement. Record-keeping improves. Communication protocols are refined. Messengers travel regularly, carrying information rather than commands. These processes remain understated, avoiding spectacle. Efficiency increases without altering the settlement's calm rhythm. This rhythm continues to shape daily life. Residents still experience predictable routines. Farming cycles repeat, maintenance schedules hold. The presence of external engagement does not disrupt internal stability. Shady Sands treats coordination as an extension of routine rather than a departure from it. Education evolves alongside these changes. Practical instruction expands to include negotiation, logistics, and conflict avoidance. These skills are taught quietly, embedded in daily tasks rather than formal lessons. Children observe adults navigating agreements and learn by participation. Knowledge spreads organically. This emphasis on practical education reinforces Shady Sands' long-term outlook. The settlement prepares its people not only to survive, but to sustain relationships over time. Emotional restraint, patience, and consistency are valued as much as technical skill. These traits become cultural norms. As Shady Sands' network grows, it becomes more aware of regional patterns. Migration flows, resource shifts, and emerging threats are tracked over time. This awareness informs planning without inducing alarm. The settlement does not rush to respond to every fluctuation. It watches, waits, and adjusts incrementally. Waiting remains central to Shady Sands' identity. It waits for confirmation before acting. It waits for systems to settle before expanding. This patience frustrates some outsiders who prefer decisive gestures. Internally, patience is understood as discipline. The settlement trusts time as a stabilizing force. This trust influences how Shady Sands handles conflict. When disputes arise between neighboring communities, Shady Sands offers space for dialogue rather than judgment. It facilitates conversation without dictating outcomes. This neutrality builds credibility. Parties feel heard without feeling coerced. Over time, this facilitation role deepens Shady Sand's influence. Others begin to approach it as a place of resolution. This role is accepted cautiously. The settlement avoids becoming an arbiter unless invited. Consent remains essential. Shady Sands understands that authority imposed is authority resisted. This restraint protects the settlement from overextension. It maintains capacity by limiting scope. Shady Sands remains small in appearance, even as its reach expands through connection. This invisibility reduces risk. Power that is not displayed is less likely to be challenged. The physical settlement reflects this philosophy. There are no grand additions to signal growing influence. Infrastructure improvements remain subtle. Storage expands quietly. Administrative spaces are added discreetly. The outward face of Shady Sands remains modest, preserving its understated presence. Residents notice these changes only gradually. Life feels slightly easier. Systems run more smoothly. Minor inefficiencies are resolved. The absence of disruption reinforces trust in leadership. People continue their routines without anxiety, confident that the settlement remains stable. This confidence allows for quiet innovation. Small improvements are tested and refined. New methods are adopted when they demonstrate clear benefit. Innovation is never rushed. It is integrated slowly, ensuring compatibility with existing practices. The settlement's relationship with technology remains cautious. Tools are maintained rather than replaced. Complex systems are avoided unless necessary. Shady Sands prefers technologies that can be repaired locally and understood fully. Dependence on external expertise is minimized. This approach limits rapid advancement, but enhances resilience. When systems fail, repairs are manageable. When supplies fluctuate, alternatives exist. Shady Sands prioritizes durability over performance. This priority reflects its broader philosophy of sustainability. As Shady Sands continues to coordinate regionally, it becomes increasingly aware of its symbolic role. Others begin to reference it as a model of order. Internally, this symbolism is acknowledged but not embraced. The settlement avoids cultivating an image. It prefers to be useful rather than admired. This avoidance of symbolism protects Shady Sands from idealization. Idealization creates unrealistic expectations. By remaining practical and reserved, the settlement maintains flexibility. It can adjust without disappointing those who project meaning onto it. The desert remains a constant presence, shaping perspective. Even as networks expand, the environment reminds residents of limits. Water remains precious. Distance remains challenging. These constraints ground decision-making, preventing abstraction from overriding reality. This grounding influences how Shady Sands approaches planning. Long-term projects are broken into manageable phases. Progress is evaluated continuously. Plans are revised quietly when conditions change. This adaptability prevents large-scale failure. The settlement's culture continues to emphasize shared responsibility. People understand that stability is collective work. No single role is elevated above others. Contributions are valued for their impact rather than their visibility. This egalitarian ethos reinforces cohesion. As years pass, Shady Sands becomes a place defined by reliability, not excitement, not dominance, but steadiness. This reputation attracts those who value predictability. It discourages those seeking rapid gain or control. In this way, Shady Sands shapes its own population through culture rather than policy. The settlement's influence within the world of Fallout continues to grow without fanfare. It does not announce milestones or commemorate achievements. It measures success through continuity. Are systems holding? Are people secure? Is life sustainable? This quiet metric keeps expectations realistic. Shady Sands does not promise a restored world. It promises a functioning one. This modest promise proves powerful in a landscape defined by extremes. As coordination deepens, Shady Sands becomes more resilient to shock. Disruptions in one area are absorbed by the network. Redundancy increases. Support flows through established channels. The settlement no longer stands alone, but it also does not stand above others. This balance between connection and independence defines Shady Sands at this stage. It is rooted yet adaptable, modest yet influential. It remains cautious even as its role expands, guided by the same principles that shaped its beginnings. Daily life continues with familiar rhythm. The sun rises, the desert shifts. Within the walls, people work, rest, and repeat. Change happens slowly, layered beneath routine. In this steady progression, Shady Sands demonstrates a form of leadership that does not rely on command. It leads by maintaining itself, by showing that stability is possible without spectacle, that cooperation can exist without domination. This phase prepares Shady Sands for greater pressures ahead, not by hardening it, but by refining its balance. Systems are tested, values are reinforced, identity is clarified. For now, the settlement remains calm. Its influence spreads quietly through trust and consistency. Shady Sands continues to do what it has always done. It observes, adjusts, and endures. A steady presence in a shifting world, carrying forward not a vision of conquest, but a method of living that prioritizes patience, restraint, and the careful maintenance of what already works. As Shady Sands' network of relationships settles into something durable, the settlement begins to experience a subtle shift in how it understands responsibility. Responsibility is no longer limited to maintaining internal order or honoring local agreements. It becomes anticipatory. Shady Sands starts to think not only about present conditions, but about pressures that have not yet arrived. This forward-looking awareness does not create anxiety, it creates preparation. Preparation in Shady Sands is quiet and methodical. There are no emergency declarations or sweeping reforms. Instead, systems are tested gently, supplies are inventoried more carefully, redundancies are built where possible, water storage is reviewed, food reserves are rotated. These actions do not disrupt daily life. They are folded into routine, becoming part of the background rhythm. This habit of preparation changes how residents relate to uncertainty. The unknown is no longer something to fear or avoid. It becomes something to account for. Shady Sands accepts that conditions will change. Droughts may come, trade routes may shift, alliances may weaken. By acknowledging this openly, without dramatization, the settlement reduces the emotional impact of disruption when it occurs. The presence of foresight also alters leadership dynamics. Leaders are no longer chosen solely for their ability to manage the present. They are valued for their capacity to think patiently, to resist impulsive solutions, and to communicate calmly during uncertainty. This emphasis favors individuals who are steady rather than charismatic. Authority continues to be understated. Communication becomes increasingly important during this phase. Shady Sands refines how information moves internally and externally. Messages are clear, concise, and free of exaggeration. Alarmist language is avoided deliberately. This restraint prevents panic and preserves trust. When Shady Sands speaks, it does so with care, knowing that its words carry weight. This careful communication reinforces the settlement's reputation. Others learn to trust not only what Shady Sands does, but how it speaks. Silence is used when clarity is lacking. Statements are made only when necessary. This selective communication prevents misinterpretation and limits rumor. As Shady Sands' influence continues to spread, it begins to encounter situations where neutrality is tested. Conflicts arise nearby that cannot be ignored entirely. Requests for support or intervention become more frequent. Each request is evaluated against the settlement's core principles. Shady Sands remains consistent in its approach, prioritizing stability and sustainability over short-term resolution. This consistency sometimes leads to difficult decisions. Shady Sands may decline involvement even when asked directly. These refusals are handled respectfully and explained clearly. The settlement understands that saying no is sometimes necessary to preserve long-term balance. Over time, others come to respect these boundaries, even if they do not always agree with them. Internally, this period reinforces discipline. Residents understand that restraint is not weakness, it is a strategy. The settlement does not need to respond to every call to justify its role. Its value lies in reliability, not responsiveness. This understanding reduces internal pressure to perform or prove relevance. Daily life remains largely unchanged. People continue to work, rest, and repeat familiar tasks. This continuity provides emotional grounding even as external complexity increases. The stability of routine allows residents to absorb broader responsibilities without stress. The extraordinary remains layered beneath the ordinary. This layering shapes culture in subtle ways. People become accustomed to thinking in longer timelines. Decisions are discussed with reference to future implications rather than immediate outcomes. This long-view perspective becomes habitual, influencing everything from resource use to conflict resolution. Education adapts accordingly. Young people are taught not just practical skills, but habits of thought. Patience, observation, and incremental problem solving are emphasized. These traits are modeled rather than instructed. Children learn by watching adults deliberate calmly and act conservatively. This modeling ensures cultural continuity. Values are transmitted through behavior rather than doctrine. Shady Sands does not rely on slogans or ideology. Its culture is embodied in routine. This embodiment makes it resilient to external influence and internal change. As systems mature, Shady Sands becomes more efficient without becoming rigid. Processes are refined quietly. Bottlenecks are identified and resolved. These improvements are rarely celebrated. They are simply absorbed. Efficiency is treated as maintenance, not achievement. The settlement's relationship with risk continues to evolve. Shady Sands becomes adept at distinguishing between manageable risk and destabilizing risk. It tolerates the former and avoids the latter. This discernment allows for cautious experimentation without jeopardizing core stability. Technology remains a careful consideration. Shady Sands continues to evaluate tools and systems for durability and comprehension. Complex technologies are adopted only when they can be supported locally. This prevents dependence and ensures continuity. The settlement prefers understanding over capability. This philosophy extends to governance tools as well. Administrative systems are kept simple. Procedures are documented clearly. Complexity is avoided unless absolutely necessary. This simplicity ensures that systems remain functional even during disruption. As Shady Sands' role in the region becomes more established, it begins to influence norms indirectly. Others adopt similar practices after observing their effectiveness. This diffusion happens without instruction or enforcement. Shady Sands does not claim credit. Influence spreads quietly through example. This quiet influence reinforces the settlement's self-image. Shady Sands does not see itself as a leader or authority. It sees itself as a participant in a broader effort to stabilize life in the wasteland. This humility prevents overreach and preserves internal cohesion. The environment continues to ground perspective. The desert remains demanding and indifferent. It resists excess and punishes complacency. Shady Sands internalizes this lesson daily. Stability is never assumed. It is maintained through attention and effort. As years pass, the settlement's identity becomes deeply ingrained. It is known for consistency, patience, and restraint. These traits attract individuals who value order and discourage those seeking dominance or spectacle. Population growth remains controlled, preserving balance. The settlement's systems become increasingly self-correcting. Small issues are identified early and addressed before they escalate. This proactive maintenance reduces crisis frequency and severity. Shady Sands experiences fewer shocks not because it is immune, but because it is attentive. This attentiveness creates a calm confidence among residents. They trust the settlement's ability to adapt without drama. This trust reduces anxiety and fosters cooperation. People are more willing to contribute when they believe their efforts support something durable. Externally, Shady Sands' calm presence begins to influence regional expectations. Others come to see stability as attainable rather than exceptional. This shift in perception is subtle but significant. It changes how communities plan and interact. Within the world of Fallout, Shady Sands occupies an increasingly important role, not because it seeks prominence, but because it demonstrates viability. It shows that order can persist without coercion, that growth can occur without haste. This demonstration carries weight. It challenges assumptions shaped by decades of chaos. Yet Shady Sands does not frame itself as a solution or blueprint. It continues to operate quietly, focused on maintaining what it has built. As Shady Sands moves deeper into this phase, it remains vigilant against complacency. Leaders and residents alike understand that stability is dynamic. Conditions will change. New pressures will emerge. The settlement prepares without predicting specifics. Preparation remains grounded in routine. Supplies are checked, systems are tested, communication channels are maintained. These actions continue day after day, reinforcing resilience through repetition. The absence of spectacle remains intentional. Shady Sands does not seek to inspire through drama, it inspires through persistence. This persistence is less visible, but more enduring. Daily life continues. The sun rises over the desert. Wind moves across the sand. Inside the walls, people carry out familiar tasks. Change happens slowly, integrated carefully. In this stage, Shady Sands becomes something quietly rare. A place where foresight replaces fear, where preparation replaces reaction, and where stability is not an endpoint, but an ongoing practice. The settlement does not declare its readiness. It demonstrates it through continuity, through systems that hold, relationships that endure, and a culture that values patience over urgency. As time moves forward, Shady Sands remains steady, not fixed, not stagnant, but balanced, prepared for pressures it cannot yet see, grounded in routines it knows well. In the vast uncertainty of the wasteland, this quiet readiness becomes its defining strength. Shady Sands continues to exist not as a monument to survival, but as a living process, attentive, restrained, and enduring, moving forward one careful day at a time. As Shady Sands continues to exist within this long stretch of relative calm, something subtle begins to change in how its people understand continuity. Continuity is no longer just about keeping systems running or routines intact. It becomes about shaping expectations. Residents begin to assume that Shady Sands will still be there tomorrow, and the day after that, and years beyond. This assumption is quiet, unspoken, and deeply powerful. This sense of assumed continuity alters behavior in small but meaningful ways. People plan further ahead without realizing it. Repairs are made with longevity in mind rather than temporary fixes. Tools are maintained carefully. Structures are reinforced instead of patched. These choices reflect an internalized belief that effort invested now will matter later. This belief changes how people relate to one another as well. Relationships deepen through shared responsibility rather than emotional intensity. Trust is built through reliability. People notice who shows up consistently, who maintains routines, who follows through. Reputation in Shady Sands is earned quietly through behavior, not words. Over time, this creates a social fabric defined by dependability. Dependability becomes a cultural value. It is not celebrated publicly or rewarded ceremonially. It is simply expected. Those who act reliably are relied upon more. Those who do not gradually find themselves excluded from critical roles. This natural sorting maintains stability without formal enforcement. Social order emerges from collective observation rather than decree. As expectations solidify, Shady Sands begins to experience a new kind of vulnerability. Stability creates attachment. Attachment creates fear of loss. The settlement becomes something people care about deeply, even if they rarely articulate it. This care introduces emotional stakes that were absent in the earliest days when survival overshadowed everything else. Shady Sands responds to this vulnerability not by suppressing attachment, but by channeling it into maintenance. Care becomes expressed through work rather than sentiment. People protect what they value by tending it, reinforcing it, and preparing for its defense quietly. Emotion is translated into action, preserving balance. This translation prevents panic during uncertainty. When threats appear on the horizon, residents do not react with fear or denial. They respond with familiar motions. Supplies are checked. Watch schedules are adjusted. Plans are reviewed. These actions provide reassurance, not because danger is eliminated, but because response is structured. This structured response reinforces confidence in the settlement systems. People trust processes more than individuals. They believe that even if leadership changes, the systems will hold. This belief reduces anxiety and prevents over-reliance on specific figures. Authority remains embedded in routine rather than personality. The settlement's increasing sense of permanence also influences how it interacts with history. Shady Sands begins to collect fragments of the past more deliberately. Old maps, records, and artifacts are cataloged not as relics, but as context. The past is studied to understand patterns, not to inspire nostalgia. This pragmatic relationship with history prevents idealization. Shady Sands does not attempt to recreate the pre-war world. It studies it to avoid repeating mistakes. Collapse is treated as a lesson rather than a tragedy. This mindset grounds decision-making and reinforces humility. Humility remains central to Shady Sands' identity. Despite its growing influence, the settlement avoids self-congratulation. Success is treated as provisional. Residents understand that conditions can change. Droughts, conflicts, or external pressures could still disrupt stability. This awareness keeps preparation active. Preparation continues to evolve quietly. Defensive measures are refined without escalation. Communication networks are maintained. Redundancy is increased where possible. These actions are integrated into routine so thoroughly that they rarely draw attention. Preparedness becomes invisible. This invisibility extends to governance as well. Decisions are made without drama. Meetings are calm and procedural. Disagreements are resolved through discussion rather than confrontation. This method reduces emotional fatigue and preserves trust. People feel heard even when outcomes do not favor them. As Shady Sands' population grows modestly, cultural transmission becomes more important. New residents are not indoctrinated, they adapt through participation. By observing routines and expectations, they internalize values organically. This passive integration preserves coherence without coercion. This process filters the population naturally. Those who value patience and cooperation tend to remain. Those seeking rapid advancement or control often move on. Over time, Shady Sands shapes itself through culture rather than policy. Identity becomes self-reinforcing. The settlement's relationship with the surrounding region remains measured. It continues to coordinate without dominating. It provides stability without demanding allegiance. This approach limits resentment and preserves autonomy. Shady Sands becomes a trusted neighbor rather than a controlling force. Trust accumulates slowly. It is built through consistent behavior over time. Shady Sands does not attempt to accelerate this process. It allows trust to form naturally. This patience ensures that relationships are durable rather than fragile. As external pressures fluctuate, Shady Sands' steadiness becomes more noticeable. In times of instability elsewhere, people look toward it for reference. The settlement does not advertise solutions. It demonstrates them quietly through continued function. This demonstration influences regional behavior subtly. Others adopt similar practices after observing their effectiveness. Shady Sands does not claim authorship. Influence spreads without ownership. This diffusion protects the settlement from backlash. Internally, the sense of being observed does not create pressure. Residents do not feel the need to perform. They continue routines as they always have. This authenticity preserves trust and prevents performative stability. As years pass, Shady Sands becomes less reactive and more anticipatory. Patterns are recognized earlier. Responses are refined. The settlement learns from small disruptions, adjusting before larger ones occur. This learning is incremental and continuous. This continuous learning strengthens resilience. Shady Sands does not rely on static plans. It relies on adaptable systems. When conditions shift, adjustments are made quietly. This flexibility prevents rigidity from becoming a weakness. The desert continues to serve as a grounding force. It reminds residents of limits. Water remains precious. Distance remains challenging. These constraints prevent overconfidence. Shady Sands remains aware that its success depends on alignment with its environment, not dominance over it. This environmental awareness shapes long-term planning. Expansion is evaluated carefully. Resource use is monitored. Sustainability remains a priority. Shady Sands understands that growth without balance invites collapse. As generational continuity deepens, identity becomes inherited rather than chosen. Children grow up immersed in routines that shape their worldview. Stability feels normal. Chaos feels distant. This generational perspective reinforces the settlement's grounding. Yet Shady Sands remains careful not to romanticize itself. Stories of hardship are preserved alongside stories of success. The settlement acknowledges that its stability was earned through effort and restraint. This acknowledgement prevents complacency. Complacency is treated as a risk equal to external threat. Systems are reviewed regularly. Assumptions are questioned quietly. The settlement remains alert to subtle signs of strain. This vigilance prevents gradual erosion. The role of leadership continues to emphasize facilitation over direction. Leaders coordinate rather than command. They ensure that processes function smoothly. Their presence is steady rather than assertive. This style maintains trust and prevents power consolidation. As Shady Sands continues along this path, it becomes something increasingly rare in the wasteland. Not a fortress, not an empire, but a stable center. A place where life unfolds predictably, where systems endure, and where people live without constant crisis. Within the world of Fallout, this stability carries quiet significance. It challenges assumptions about post-war life. It suggests that endurance does not require domination, and that order can persist through patience and care. Shady Sands does not claim to have solved the wasteland's problems. It does not seek to impose its methods universally. It simply continues to exist, demonstrating that another way is possible. As this phase deepens, the settlement feels settled in a way that transcends physical structure. Its systems are internalized. Its values are lived rather than stated. Stability becomes habitual. Daily life continues with familiar rhythm. Work is done. Rest is taken. Maintenance continues. These routines ground the extraordinary within the ordinary. Change happens slowly, integrated carefully. In this quiet persistence, Shady Sands becomes a place defined less by what it does and more by how it does it. Calm replaces urgency. Preparation replaces fear. Continuity replaces spectacle. The settlement remains alert, not anxious, confident, not complacent. It stands not as a symbol of conquest or rebirth, but as evidence that civilization can return in understated ways. As time moves forward, Shady Sands continues to refine itself through attention and restraint. It listens to its environment, to its people, and to the patterns that shape the wasteland. In doing so, it preserves something fragile and rare, a sustained rhythm of life that does not depend on force or legend, but on repetition, cooperation, and quiet care. Shady Sands endures not because it demands to, but because it knows how to remain. As Shady Sands continues along this long arc of stability, its relationship with authority grows more nuanced. Authority no longer feels like something that must be asserted or defended. It becomes something that exists quietly, sustained by trust and familiarity. People follow systems not because they fear consequences, but because those systems have proven reliable over time. This quiet legitimacy reshapes how power is experienced within the settlement. Power in Shady Sands is increasingly procedural rather than personal. Decisions emerge from established processes, discussions follow predictable formats, and outcomes are implemented steadily. This predictability removes tension from governance. People rarely wonder what will happen next. They understand the steps, the pace, and the logic behind decisions, even when outcomes are uncertain. This procedural authority reduces conflict without suppressing disagreement. Disagreements still occur, but they unfold within known boundaries. Voices are heard, concerns are recorded, adjustments are considered. The absence of urgency allows discussions to remain calm. Emotional escalation becomes unnecessary when outcomes are not decided impulsively. Over time, this calm governance style influences how residents perceive fairness. Fairness is not equated with equal outcomes, but with consistent treatment. People trust the process more than they trust individuals. This trust creates resilience. When mistakes occur, they are corrected through the same channels that produce them, reinforcing confidence rather than undermining it. The settlement's increasing administrative maturity also changes how it handles complexity. Problems are broken into smaller parts, responsibilities are assigned clearly, progress is tracked methodically. This approach prevents overwhelm. Large challenges feel manageable because they are addressed incrementally. Incrementalism becomes a defining trait. Shady Sands rarely pursues sweeping reforms. It prefers small adjustments tested over time. These adjustments accumulate into significant change without disruption. Residents often notice improvements only in hindsight, when they realize how much easier life has become compared to years past. This gradual improvement deepens attachment to routine. Routine is no longer just comforting, it is productive. People see direct results from consistent effort. Maintenance reduces breakdowns. Planning reduces emergencies. Preparation reduces fear. These tangible benefits reinforce cultural values. The settlement's infrastructure reflects this philosophy. Systems are layered rather than replaced. New components integrate with old ones carefully. Redundancy is favored over efficiency when the two conflict. Shady Sands accepts that redundancy appears wasteful in the short term, but proves invaluable during disruption. Water systems, storage practices, and defensive planning all follow this logic. Nothing relies on a single point of failure. When something breaks, alternatives exist. Repairs are manageable rather than catastrophic. This resilience becomes part of the settlement's identity, though it is rarely discussed explicitly. As Shady Sands systems grow more robust, the settlement becomes more forgiving of minor errors. People know that small mistakes will not cascade into disaster. This forgiveness reduces stress and encourages participation. Residents are more willing to contribute when they are not afraid of causing harm through missteps. This emotional safety strengthens cooperation. People communicate openly about problems rather than hiding them. Issues are addressed early, before they escalate. This transparency is not mandated. It emerges naturally from trust in the system's capacity to absorb strain. The settlement's relationship with outsiders also reflects this maturity. Shady Sands no longer feels the need to prove itself through caution or restraint. It remains careful, but confidence replaces suspicion. Outsiders are assessed calmly. Interaction follows established protocols. Trust is built through consistency rather than vigilance. This confidence does not lead to openness without limits. Boundaries remain clear. Shady Sands understands that stability depends on selectivity. Not everyone aligns with its values. The settlement remains comfortable, declining engagement when necessary, without defensiveness. This comfort with boundaries reduces tension. Saying no becomes routine rather than confrontational. Others learn what to expect. Predictability replaces negotiation. This clarity prevents misunderstandings and preserves relationships even when interests diverge. As Shady Sands' influence persists, it begins to encounter expectations shaped by its reputation. Some see it as a guarantor of order, others see it as a potential leader. Internally, these projections are acknowledged but not embraced. The settlement does not redefine itself to meet external expectations. This refusal to adopt a larger identity protects Shady Sands from overreach. It avoids the trap of becoming responsible for problems beyond its capacity. The settlement understands that assuming too much responsibility undermines sustainability. Restraint remains central. Restraint also shapes how Shady Sands responds to success. Achievements are not celebrated extravagantly. Milestones pass quietly. The absence of ceremony prevents complacency and ego. Success is treated as confirmation that systems are working, not as justification for expansion. This mindset influences how residents think about legacy. Legacy is not something to be pursued actively, it is something that emerges if continuity is maintained. People focus on doing their part well rather than imagining how they will be remembered. This focus keeps attention anchored in the present. The settlement's growing sense of normalcy becomes its most striking feature. Life in Shady Sands feels ordinary in ways that are rare in the wasteland. Ordinary routines, ordinary concerns, ordinary expectations. This ordinariness is carefully maintained, protected from disruption through constant attention. Ordinariness does not mean stagnation. Change continues, but it is absorbed into routine. New roles appear, old practices are refined. Adjustments happen without altering the overall rhythm. Life feels continuous rather than episodic. This continuity shapes how residents experience time. Days blend together, seasons pass without sharp transitions. The absence of crisis reduces the perception of urgency. Life unfolds steadily, allowing people to invest emotionally without fear of sudden loss. As emotional investment deepens, Shady Sands becomes a place people identify with rather than merely inhabit. Belonging grows from participation, not ideology. People belong because they contribute, because they are present, because they share responsibility. This participatory belonging strengthens social cohesion. People feel accountable to one another without needing formal enforcement. Norms are maintained through expectation rather than punishment. Deviations are corrected gently through reminder and example. The settlement's culture continues to discourage extremes. Excessive ambition is tempered. Excessive caution is questioned. Balance is valued. This moderation prevents internal polarization and preserves cooperation. As external conditions fluctuate, Shady Sands' moderation becomes more apparent. While others swing between crisis and consolidation, Shady Sands remains steady. This steadiness attracts attention without inviting challenge. It becomes a reference point rather than a target. Within the broader context of Fallout, Shady Sands now occupies a unique position. It represents continuity without dominance, order without coercion, and progress without haste. Its existence reframes what survival can look like in the post-war world. Yet Shady Sands does not present itself as an answer. It does not broadcast its methods or advocate for replication. It continues to operate quietly, focused on its own systems. Others draw lessons independently. This independence protects Shady Sands from ideological conflict. It does not need to defend its choices publicly. Its success speaks softly, through persistence rather than proclamation. As years pass, the settlement systems become deeply ingrained. New residents adapt quickly. Old residents move through routines effortlessly. The settlement feels less like a project and more like an environment. This environmental quality is important. People do not feel managed. They feel supported. Systems exist to facilitate life rather than control it. This support fosters trust and reduces resistance. The desert remains unchanged around Shady Sands. Wind, heat, and distance continue to shape perspective. These constants remind residents that stability is relative. The environment cannot be controlled, only accommodated. This awareness maintains humility. Humility prevents complacency. Systems are reviewed regularly. Assumptions are tested. The settlement remains alert to subtle changes. This vigilance is calm, not anxious. It is part of routine. As Shady Sands moves further along this path, it becomes increasingly difficult to pinpoint when survival turned into stability. There is no single moment of transformation. Stability emerges gradually, layered over years of consistent effort. This gradual emergence reinforces the settlement's core belief that lasting change does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates through repetition, cooperation, and attention. Shady Sands embodies this belief in every aspect of its existence. Daily life continues. Work is done. Rest is taken. Maintenance persists. These simple actions sustain something rare. Shady Sands stands quietly, not as a monument, but as a living system, one that adapts without losing form, grows without rushing, and endures without demanding recognition. In this phase, the settlement feels settled in a deeper sense, not fixed, not complete, but comfortable in its rhythm, prepared to continue, attentive to its limits, and grounded in routines that have proven their worth. As time moves forward, Shady Sands remains steady. It does not announce its resilience. It demonstrates it, day after day, through the unremarkable consistency of a place that has learned how to remain. As Shady Sands continues to move forward without spectacle, it begins to experience a subtle internal shift that is difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. The settlement no longer feels like something that must be protected at every moment. It feels protected by its own momentum. Systems reinforce one another. Habits sustain habits. Stability becomes self-perpetuating, carried forward by ordinary behavior rather than deliberate effort. This momentum changes how people relate to effort itself. In earlier years, every task felt critical. A missed repair, a neglected field, or a delayed decision carried immediate risk. Now, effort is distributed across time. No single action determines survival. Instead, survival emerges from accumulation. Many small actions, performed consistently, create resilience without drama. This accumulation alters emotional tone. Anxiety fades into awareness. Vigilance becomes routine rather than stress. People notice problems earlier, not because they are fearful, but because attentiveness has become habitual. The settlement does not react sharply to minor disruptions. It absorbs them, adjusts, and continues. Absorption becomes one of Shady Sands' defining traits. Small shocks no longer ripple outward. A supply delay does not cause panic. A disagreement does not fracture trust. The settlement systems dampen disruption naturally. This damping effect creates a sense of calm that extends into everyday life. Calm, however, does not mean disengagement. Shady Sands remains attentive to the wider world. It simply processes information differently. News is evaluated slowly. Reports are compared against patterns rather than emotions. The settlement trusts trend over rumor, consistency over urgency. This measured approach prevents reactive decision-making. As regional dynamics shift, Shady Sands becomes increasingly skilled at contextualizing change. A conflict elsewhere is not immediately interpreted as threat. A new faction is observed over time rather than judged instantly. This patience allows Shady Sands to avoid entanglement in short-lived upheavals. Avoidance of entanglement is not avoidance of responsibility. The settlement distinguishes carefully between involvement that stabilizes and involvement that destabilizes. When engagement aligns with long-term balance, it is considered. When it introduces volatility, it is declined. This discernment becomes more refined with experience. Experience accumulates quietly. Shady Sands does not mark anniversaries or milestones, yet its people carry a deep sense of how long they have endured. Time is felt through continuity rather than celebration. The absence of markers allows years to pass without burden, reinforcing the feeling that stability is normal rather than exceptional. This normalization affects identity profoundly. Residents no longer think of themselves primarily as survivors. They think of themselves as residents, contributors, caretakers. Survival is assumed. Attention shifts toward quality rather than endurance. How well systems function matters more than whether they exist at all. Quality improvements remain modest and deliberate. Comfort increases slowly. Tools become more refined. Living spaces are maintained with care. These improvements do not alter the settlement's character. They enhance it quietly, reinforcing attachment without encouraging excess. Attachment, now deeply rooted, shapes behavior in subtle ways. People invest more effort in long-term maintenance. They take pride in consistency rather than innovation. Pride is expressed through reliability. Showing up matters more than standing out. This culture of reliability influences social dynamics. People who act steadily are trusted implicitly. Trust accumulates through time, not gesture. Reputation is slow to change, for better or worse. This slowness discourages manipulation and encourages patience. As trust deepens, social friction decreases. Disagreements still occur, but they unfold within a context of shared expectation. Resolution is sought not to win, but to restore equilibrium. The settlement prioritizes continuation over conclusion. Continuation becomes the guiding principle. Decisions are evaluated based on whether they preserve flow. Does this choice allow life to continue predictably? Does it support routine? Does it reduce the chance of disruption? These questions guide deliberation more than ideology. This pragmatic framework prevents polarization. Extremes are moderated naturally. Proposals that promise rapid gain are viewed with skepticism. Proposals that ensure durability are favored. This conservatism is not rigid. It is adaptive, informed by experience. As Shady Sands conservatism becomes evident, it attracts certain kinds of people. Those seeking stability find it appealing. Those seeking rapid ascent find it limiting. Over time, this selective attraction reinforces cultural coherence. The settlement shapes its population through rhythm rather than rule. The physical environment continues to play a grounding role. The desert remains unchanged, indifferent to progress. Its presence reminds residents that stability exists within limits. Resources must be managed. Distance must be respected. Nature remains a constraint rather than a conquered space. This environmental constraint keeps Shady Sands humble. Success is never mistaken for invincibility. Preparations continue. Systems are reviewed. Assumptions are questioned quietly. The settlement understands that endurance requires attention, not confidence alone. As years pass, Shady Sands begins to feel less like a response to catastrophe and more like a continuation of human behavior. People wake, work, rest, and repeat. Life feels ordinary. This ordinariness is the settlement's greatest achievement. Ordinariness allows for emotional depth without volatility. People form relationships without fear of immediate loss. Children grow up without constant crisis shaping their worldview. Time stretches forward calmly. The future feels approachable rather than abstract. This forward feeling alters how risk is perceived. Shady Sands becomes more willing to invest cautiously in long-term projects. Infrastructure is reinforced, knowledge is preserved, education expands subtly. These investments are made without urgency, guided by confidence in continuity. Confidence remains understated. There are no declarations of success. Shady Sands does not proclaim itself secure. It behaves securely. This behavior communicates stability more effectively than words ever could. Within the broader world of Fallout, Shady Sands now represents something quietly transformative. It reframes what rebuilding looks like. Not a dramatic return to the past, not a bold leap into the future, but a careful extension of the present. This reframing influences how others imagine possibility. Some see shady sands and reconsider what they are striving for. Others dismiss it as slow or unambitious. Shady Sands remains indifferent to both reactions. It continues to operate according to its own logic. Indifference protects focus. The settlement does not chase approval or fear criticism. Its attention remains inward, on systems and people. This inward focus prevents drift and preserves coherence. As stability becomes ingrained, Shady Sands develops an internal rhythm that resists disruption. Even when external conditions fluctuate, the settlement maintains pace. This consistency creates a sense of insulation without isolation. Insulation allows for thoughtful response rather than reaction. When change does come, Shady Sands adjusts incrementally. It does not freeze or surge. It adapts calmly, maintaining form while adjusting function. This adaptability ensures longevity. The settlement does not depend on specific conditions to survive. It depends on its ability to respond without losing identity. This flexibility becomes more refined with time. Identity itself becomes quiet and unassuming. Shady Sands does not define itself through slogans or symbols. It is defined through practice, through how decisions are made, through how people treat one another, through how systems are maintained. Practice replaces philosophy. Values are lived rather than discussed. This embodiment makes them resilient. They cannot be argued away easily because they are not abstract. They exist in action. As Shady Sands continues along this path, it becomes increasingly difficult to imagine its absence. The settlement feels woven into the region's fabric, not dominant, not central, but steady. A constant presence that others account for without consciously acknowledging. This embeddedness creates a new kind of security. Shady Sands is no longer a point of vulnerability. It is a baseline, something assumed, something expected. Expectation reduces fear. When people expect continuity, they plan accordingly. Life becomes less reactive. Decisions become calmer. The settlement's influence extends into mindset as much as territory. Yet Shady Sands remains careful not to take this expectation for granted. Preparedness continues. Systems are monitored. The settlement resists the temptation to relax vigilance completely. It understands that endurance is an ongoing process. This understanding prevents decay. Complacency never fully takes hold. Attention remains active, though unstrained. People continue to care because caring has become part of routine. As time moves forward, Shady Sands continues to exist in this steady state, not static, not dramatic, but durable. Its strength lies not in power, but in process, not in ambition, but in balance. The sun rises and sets over the desert. Wind moves across the sand. Inside the walls, life unfolds with quiet regularity. Work is done, rest is taken, maintenance continues. In this unremarkable repetition, Shady Sands achieves something rare, a sustained, livable present, one that does not depend on hope or fear, but on attention, cooperation, and time. Shady Sands does not rush toward the future or cling to the past. It remains where it is, adjusting gently as needed. This presence becomes its legacy, and so the settlement continues, steady and unassuming, shaping the world around it, not through force or vision, but through the simple act of remaining. As Shady Sands settles into this long-held steadiness, the idea of continuity begins to feel less like a goal and more like an atmosphere. It surrounds daily life, shaping expectations without announcing itself. People wake with the quiet assumption that systems will hold, that routines will unfold as planned, that the settlement will continue to function as it did yesterday. This assumption is neither complacent nor naive. It is earned through years of consistency. This earned expectation changes how uncertainty is experienced. Uncertainty does not disappear, but it loses its sharpness. When something unexpected occurs, the first response is not alarm, but assessment. What has changed? How does it affect existing routines? What adjustments are required? These questions arise naturally, without urgency. Shady Sands treats uncertainty as a variable to be integrated rather than a threat to be resisted. Integration becomes a core skill. New conditions are folded into existing systems with minimal disruption. If a resource fluctuates, consumption is adjusted gradually. If a route becomes unreliable, alternatives are explored quietly. The settlement avoids dramatic pivots. It prefers slow recalibration, trusting that small, consistent adjustments produce better outcomes than sudden shifts. This approach affects how residents relate to planning. Plans are no longer rigid projections of the future. They are living documents, revised as conditions change. Flexibility is built in from the start. People expect plans to evolve, and this expectation reduces frustration. Change feels normal rather than destabilizing. As planning becomes more fluid, the settlement's culture grows increasingly comfortable with ambiguity. Not every question needs an immediate answer. Not every issue requires resolution at once. Shady Sands allows problems to exist temporarily while information accumulates. This patience prevents premature decisions that could create new complications. Patience also shapes interpersonal relationships. Disagreements are approached with the understanding that time can soften edges. People are less inclined to demand immediate resolution. They allow conversations to unfold over days or weeks. This slow pace reduces emotional escalation and preserves trust. Trust, now deeply embedded, operates almost invisibly. People trust systems to function. They trust others to fulfill roles. They trust that mistakes will be addressed constructively. This trust reduces the need for oversight. Supervision becomes light. Responsibility is shared rather than enforced. Shared responsibility changes how people perceive contribution. Contribution is not measured by visibility or intensity, but by consistency. Showing up matters. Completing routine tasks matters. These actions sustain the settlement more reliably than occasional bursts of effort. The culture rewards steadiness implicitly. As steadiness becomes the norm, Shady Sands experiences a subtle shift in identity. It is no longer defined by its past struggles or future potential. It is defined by its present state. This present-focused identity feels grounded. People are less concerned with proving what Shady Sands represents and more concerned with maintaining what it is. This grounding influences how the settlement engages with broader narratives of the wasteland. Stories of collapse, conquest, and rebirth circulate beyond its walls. Shady Sands listens without internalizing them. It does not see itself as a counter-argument or exemplar. It simply continues. Continuing requires ongoing attention to detail. Small inefficiencies are noticed and corrected. Wear is addressed early. These maintenance practices prevent decay from accumulating. Shady Sands understands that neglect rarely announces itself loudly. It grows quietly in overlooked corners. Attention prevents this growth. Attention extends to people as well. Changes in behavior are noticed. Fatigue is recognized. Support is offered discreetly. The settlement does not formalize care into elaborate systems. Care exists in observation and response. This quiet attentiveness sustains morale without creating dependency. As years pass, the rhythm of Shady Sands becomes deeply internalized. People move through spaces without conscious thought. They know where to go, when to act, how to respond. This familiarity reduces cognitive load, freeing attention for observation and adjustment. This reduction in mental strain contributes to emotional calm. Life feels manageable. Stressors exist, but they are not overwhelming. The settlement structure absorbs pressure, allowing individuals to remain composed. This composure becomes part of the settlement's character. The physical environment continues to reinforce this composure. The desert remains constant, its vastness a reminder of limits. Shady Sands does not attempt to expand beyond what can be sustained. Boundaries are respected. The settlement grows inward, refining systems rather than extending reach. This inward refinement deepens resilience. Systems become more robust. Roles become clearer. Knowledge is preserved through practice. Shady Sands invests in continuity rather than novelty. This investment pays off quietly through fewer crises and smoother adaptation. As the settlement matures further, it begins to experience a rare condition in the wasteland: predictability without stagnation. Life follows familiar patterns, yet remains responsive. Change occurs, but it is measured. This balance allows people to feel secure without feeling trapped. Security encourages subtle creativity. People experiment cautiously within established frameworks. Improvements are proposed, tested, and integrated slowly. This process ensures that innovation enhances stability rather than undermining it. The settlement's governance continues to reflect this balance. Authority remains procedural, decisions are made transparently, feedback is incorporated. This openness prevents resentment and reinforces trust. People feel invested because they understand how decisions are reached. As Shady Sands systems continue to function smoothly, the settlement becomes less visible in regional narratives. It does not generate headlines or dramatic events. This invisibility is advantageous. It reduces external pressure and preserves autonomy. Autonomy allows Shady Sands to remain selective. It engages where alignment exists and withdraws where it does not. This selectivity protects resources and attention. The settlement avoids being pulled into cycles of conflict that do not serve its values. Values remain implicit rather than declared. Patience, restraint, and cooperation are lived daily. This lived culture is more durable than explicit ideology. It adapts naturally to new conditions without requiring reinterpretation. As generational continuity deepens, younger residents inherit these values without conscious effort. They grow up immersed in routines that shape their worldview. Stability feels normal. Crisis feels exceptional. This inversion alters expectations for the future. Future-oriented thinking becomes more nuanced. Shady Sands does not project grand visions. It focuses on maintaining capacity. This focus ensures readiness without overcommitment. The settlement remains prepared for change without attempting to control it. Preparation remains quiet. Supplies are monitored. Systems are tested. Communication channels are maintained. These actions are routine, not reactive. They sustain confidence without creating anxiety. Confidence, now well established, is understated. Shady Sands does not broadcast success. It does not seek validation. It continues to operate according to its internal logic. This self-contained confidence reduces susceptibility to external influence. Within the broader context of fallout, Shady Sands exemplifies a different trajectory of post-war life. It does not chase restoration of the past or domination of the present. It cultivates continuity. This cultivation has subtle effects beyond its borders. Others observe and adjust their expectations. Stability becomes imaginable. Patience becomes respectable. These shifts are quiet but meaningful. As Shady Sands continues along this path, it becomes increasingly difficult to identify moments of transformation. Change is constant but subtle. There are no turning points, only adjustments layered over time. This layering creates depth. The settlement feels lived in, not designed. Its systems reflect experience rather than theory. This authenticity enhances resilience. Daily life continues with familiar cadence. People work, rest, and repeat. The absence of crisis allows attention to settle on small improvements and relationships. Life feels full without being intense. In this sustained calm, Shady Sands achieves something uncommon. It provides a stable context in which ordinary human concerns can exist again. Not survival alone, but maintenance. Not urgency alone, but care. Care becomes the settlement's quiet engine. Care for systems, for people, for balance. This care is expressed through action rather than sentiment. It sustains continuity without demanding recognition. As time moves forward, Shady Sands remains attentive, restrained, and steady. It does not rush toward transformation or fear decline. It continues to adjust, maintain, and endure. The desert remains unchanged, a constant backdrop. Wind moves across sand. The sun rises and sets. Inside the walls, routines persist. In this persistence, Shady Sands embodies a simple truth that survival, once achieved, must be followed by maintenance. That maintenance, practiced consistently, becomes stability. And that stability, when nurtured patiently, allows life to unfold without spectacle. Shady Sands continues to exist, not as a symbol or solution, but as a place shaped by attention and time, a place that remains,